company John Deere making a big change to where they manufacture their farming equipment, leading to hundreds of U.S. layoffs.
With tariff talks top of mind, South Florida farmers say they're in trouble.
The farm equipment giant is laying off workers at 3 U.S. factories and shifting production to Mexico.
John Deere tractors, I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company, but as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico.
It begins in the middle of a silence that should not exist. A silence where engines should be roaring, where harvesters should be crawling across endless fields, where the sound of America feeding the world should echo across the plains. But instead, there is only the distant hum of a machine that hasn't been serviced in months, followed by the metallic cough of a failing engine struggling against time. A farmer stands beside it, staring at the logo he grew up trusting. The green and yellow emblem that once symbolized reliability, strength, and the pride of American agriculture today, that same symbol feels like a warning, a sign of an industry collapsing in slow motion. News breaks in fragments at first. Quiet layoffs, shifts in production, temporary pauses. Then the truth hits like a shockwave. John Deere shutting down key U.S. operations, workers sent home, factories sitting idle, the company moving more manufacturing offshore as costs skyrocket and export markets dry up. For the first time in generations, America's farmers are left without the machines they depend on, without access to repairs, and without the confidence that the country that once dominated global agriculture can still hold its ground. The collapse doesn't come from a single dramatic moment. It comes from 1,000 small failures, each one a fracture in a system that was already strained, each one pushing rural America closer to the brink. By midsummer, the impact becomes impossible to hide. Tractors begin breaking down in the middle of harvest season, and wait times for parts stretch from weeks to months. Farmers who can't get licensed repairs because of software. Locks watch their equipment sit frozen in the fields, unable to plant, unable to harvest, unable to keep up with global competitors who now produce faster, cheaper, and with supply chains that haven't been strangled by tariff battles. The U.S. was once the backbone of global food exports, but as markets shift and foreign buyers turn to Brazil, Argentina, Australia, and emerging players in Africa and Southeast Asia, American crops pile up unused, unsold, and unshipped, collapsing prices so fast that even large farms begin to feel the pressure squeeze. The crisis begins years earlier, with policy moves that seemed bold at the time but turned out to be catastrophic. Tariffs imposed on major trade partners trigger retaliation in forms no one expected. Massive agricultural boycotts, sudden cancellations of long-term grain contracts, and the emergence of new alliances that strategically cut the U.S. out of global markets. It once dominated countries that used to rely almost entirely on American soybeans, wheat, corn, and meat diversify their suppliers, signing multi-billion-dollar deals with nations that promise stability, consistency, and political neutrality. What was once a temporary setback becomes a permanent realignment. And as the rest of the world adjusts, the U.S. agricultural sector fails to respond quickly enough, caught between outdated infrastructure, expensive machinery, and a corporate ecosystem shifting production away from the very people who built it. Inside rural town halls, the mood is grim. Conversations revolve around repair delays, skyrocketing prices for used equipment, and rumors of even more factory closures. Farmers who once competed with each other now gather in the same room, sharing the same fear that the next breakdown, the next storm, the next missed shipment might be the one they don't recover from. Some try to modify their tractors themselves, bypassing the software locks that John Deere insists are necessary for safety and emissions. Others search online forums for hacked firmware, desperate to keep their operations alive. But even when they manage to bypass the restrictions, they face another wall. Parts that don't exist, technicians who have been laid off, and supply chains that no longer prioritize American farms in crisis. The layoffs ripple outward. Thousands of workers in Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, and Wisconsin pack their belongings as plants reduce shifts or close entirely. These are not just jobs. They are the beating heart of entire towns. Cafes lose their morning rush. Hardware stores lose their regulars. Schools lose the parents who supported every fundraiser, every sporting event, every local tradition. When John Deere moves its production lines south of the border, the entire Midwest feels the shock. Communities that depended on stable manufacturing wages watch their local economies unravel. At the same time, global competitors seize the moment. Chinese agricultural machinery companies flood markets with cheaper, more accessible equipment that doesn't require dealer-controlled software. European manufacturers ramp up production, offering long-term service guarantees the US can no longer match. Brazil, already rising as a global agricultural superpower, aggressively expands into former US export markets with government-backed incentives and a promise that their supply chains won't be disrupted by trade wars. For every market the US loses, another country gains, and they gain it permanently. The emotional toll on American farmers is impossible to capture in statistics alone. These are families who have worked the same land for generations, people who believe their farms were more than businesses, they were legacies. But now they find themselves staring at balance sheets that don't make sense anymore. Selling doesn't guarantee survival. Holding on means bleeding money in the hope that the market somehow rights itself. Some farmers take out emergency loans, stacking debt on top of debt just to keep the lights on. Others decide to sell equipment, livestock, even acreage, piece by piece, until there's nothing left to fight for. The slow erosion becomes a national tragedy playing out in silence, far from the headlines, far from the political speeches, far from the urban centers that depend on agriculture but rarely think about it. In Washington, lawmakers argue about whose fault the collapse really is. Some blame corporations for abandoning domestic manufacturing. Others blame the trade war that set off the chain reaction. Still others blame foreign governments for weaponizing agriculture in global politics. But while the debates rage on, no concrete solution emerges. Emergency assistance programs offer temporary relief, but they don't fix the broken supply chains, the lost export markets, or the factory closures that hollowed out the country's agricultural infrastructure. Everyone sees the fire, but no one seems able to put it out. Inside the John Deere headquarters, executives insist the shutdowns were necessary to remain competitive, citing labor costs, global market changes, and the need to modernize manufacturing. But their explanations ring hollow to the farmers who can no longer harvest their crops. Raw anger builds as people realize that decisions made in boardrooms and political offices have reshaped the entire landscape of American farming. For the first time in living memory, farmers begin to openly question whether the system they trusted was ever designed to protect them. As fall approaches, the impact becomes visible from the sky. Fields that should be green are brown. Fields that should be harvested lie abandoned. Machinery that should be running sits rusting at the edges of properties. The collapse is not theoretical anymore. It is a physical reality stretching from the Dakotas to Texas, from Ohio to the Pacific Northwest. Grain elevators report the lowest intake in decades. Ports that once shipped millions of tons of American agriculture to every corner of the globe now sit underused. Their schedules filled by foreign exporters who saw an opportunity and took it. In neighborhoods near shuttered Deere plants, families gather around kitchen tables trying to decide their future. Some talk about moving, others talk about retraining. But many remain frozen between anger and uncertainty, wondering how a company that built its identity on American soil could decide to abandon it. Even longtime employees who spent decades assembling tractors now struggle to believe the reality unfolding around them. Their futures feel as uncertain as the farmers whose livelihoods depended on what they built. The heartbreak deepens when the first wave of farm closures becomes public. These are not small operations. These are century-old farms with histories longer than many American cities. When they fall, the community feels something deeper than economic loss. It feels like the country is losing part of its soul. A farmer stands outside a barn built by his grandfather's hands, staring at equipment he can no longer afford to fix, crops he can no longer afford to harvest, and a future that no longer includes the land he once believed he would pass on to his children. The crisis accelerates faster than analysts predicted. Export markets that might have reopened remain closed. Countries that once relied on the U.S. adopt long-term policies to avoid dependence on American agriculture ever again. Banks grow hesitant to extend credit to farms considered too risky. And through it all, John Deere's shift away from American manufacturing becomes the symbol of a breakdown much larger than one company's decisions. It becomes a symbol of the collapse of an entire system, one that believed it was too big, too powerful, too rooted in history to ever fall. The final image is one no one expected to see. American farmers standing in empty fields, watching the sun set on a season they couldn't finish, holding tools that no longer matter, surrounded by machines that no longer run. They don't know what comes next,